Before we jump in to exactly what the essay looks like, I want to sort of give us a little bit of context about how we're evaluating the personal statement. So, we're very lucky here at Blue Ivy Coaching. We have a lot of contact with university admissions officers who are on committees that are deciding who is getting into college and who's getting waitlisted or who is getting rejected from colleges. And school by school, this is the list of what application officers are looking for. So this list is in order of most important to not as important. So number one by far is going to be your unweighted and your weighted GPA. So unweighted GPA meaning the grades that you got without any extra points. Weighted GPA is referring to when you get extra points because you're taking hard classes. So number one is how good are your grades are and how difficult are the classes that you're taking. That's the most important thing. Then is going to be some of our admissions exams for the US, the SAT or the ACT. That's very important for colleges to determine and compare students to make their determinations. Then is going to be the admissions essays. That's what we're focusing on today. But I just really wanted to make this point that, these essays are so important. It's probably my favorite part of working with our students. It's a really creative process. It's a really exciting process. There's a lot of reflection that goes on. But I just do want to emphasize that really at the top of the pile is going to be your GPA and your SAT. So just put that part into context. And after that comes your extracurricular activities, your recommendations, and at the very, very bottom, your interviews. But I just want to give us a little bit of context about where these admissions essays fall. So for those of us who are applying to the United States, we're going to be applying through the Common App, also known as the Common Application. Via the Common App, you can apply to up to 20 universities in the United States. Now, it is perfectly possible to apply to more than 20, but you can only apply to 20 through the Common App portal. If you want to apply to more than 20, you're going to have to be applying via each individual university's application portal beyond the first 20 that you do. We don't necessarily recommend that students apply to necessarily more than 20 universities in the States, but just for your information, that's how it works. So for the common application, you write one essay. And in that one essay, you're going to be talking to all of the universities that you're applying to. I'm going to show you what the possible prompts are for this 2025-2026 season. And you'll notice there are 7 different prompts. You only choose one, okay? I'm going to be reading through them, and at the end, I'm going to be asking for comments from all of you. You can leave a comment in the chat box. What do you notice about these questions? So please pay attention here. So here are some of the prompts that you can choose from. Some students some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful that they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. That's the first one. Then we have the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? Number 3, reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Number 4, reflect on something that someone has done for you that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. How has this gratitude affected or motivated you? Then moving on to 5, 6, and 7. Discuss an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. 6. Describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? 7, share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. I would love if everybody could just put in the chat box what you notice about these 7 prompts. Any observations about these prompts? What do we notice about these prompts? So from all 7 of these prompts, what are we noticing from these prompts? Anything in common? Anything you find surprising? Please feel free to put your comments in the chat box. So, glow, thank you. They have to do with your beliefs and values. Absolutely, right? Sort of like who you are as a person. Adriana, they're pretty general. Exactly, right? The thing is here, you can interpret these different prompts in any way you want. And literally, this last one is literally just put any essay you want. I don't have many students who choose number seven. I typically am not recommending that a student use an essay that you've already used in a different context. That's not typically what I would recommend for a student, but it is an option. And thank you, Luis Rodriguez. You put always talk about yourself. Exactly. This is about who are you? That is you all got to really and I see from Zengi, ask you to specify on just you and yourself to get to know you more as a person. Exactly. You all hit the nail on the head. So for the US personal statement, we're talking about an essay that is up to 650 words. And as you could all see there, it's not necessarily an academic essay, right? We're not necessarily talking about our academic side. It is possible to talk about our academics, but it's not necessarily a requirement. What I view as a requirement is this point here about showing your personality. I'll be showing you some real essays that we've worked on here in Blue Ivy in a few moments. And I want you to really think about how students are showing their personality for a US style personal statement. This third point, for those of you who may or may not have heard of this, for most universities in the United States, they'll accept the personal statement, and most of them will also ask for additional essays. And those additional essays will help complement the story that you're telling in your personal statement. So, especially for a US context, this personal statement is not the be all end all. This personal statement is not meant to talk about who you are in your entirety. It's impossible in 650 words to tell your whole life story. And that's actually a point that I try to make with students. We want to usually start with a very specific scope. We want to tell a very specific story. Usually it can work, but usually it's not the best idea for us to try to tell, from my birth until now, there's just not enough space. And we'll get more into that in just a moment. There are some exceptions to the US personal statement and for the Common App. For universities like Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the University of California system, which includes University of California, Berkeley, University of California, Los Angeles, and the whole California State University system, they do not accept the US personal statement. They are not using the Common App. They have their own platforms where you apply, and they have their own types of essays, which is its own different process. This last point might surprise some people, but I personally like to be very transparent about this point. When we're talking about a US personal statement, we're talking about creative writing. We're talking about, a personal narrative. There's a lot of subjectivity at play when we think about the quality of an essay. And, that's why I tend to like to have a student, show a teacher, show an uncle. If they have a coach that's helping them, show it to their coach and listen to a couple different perspectives, right? There's not just one absolute truth with what makes a quality essay. And because it's so open, this can really be overwhelming for a lot of our students. You know, I've taught high school, I've taught in various levels of school. Typically, in high school, students are focusing a lot more on persuasive writing in their English classes. They might be focusing a lot more on informational writing, sort of five paragraph structure. That's many students are not as familiar with working with on the creative side. Some schools do focus on this side, but for a lot of our students, this is not a type of writing that they're doing a lot in the classroom. So usually they need a lot of guidance. I had just mentioned these supplemental essays. So, the grand majority of US universities will accept that 650 word personal statement, and then we'll ask you for some additional essays. Every school decides what essays they're going to ask for. By August 1st, pretty much all US universities should have published what supplemental essays they're asking for. These are some of the typical ones that they ask for. They might ask, why do you want to study this major? Or why do you want to study at our university? For those who might be interested in engineering, Purdue is a really famous university, wonderful, wonderful research institution that has great engineering programs. That last year they asked both of these questions. Why do you want to study this major? And why do you want to come to our university? So, it's not forbidden to talk about your academic interests in your personal statement. Just know that if you are talking a lot about your academic interests in your personal statement, you might not leave space in your why major essay to expand upon that. So that's why I try to caution students from focusing too much on the academic side in their personal statement. I will show you an example. I'll show you two different examples of US personal statements. Um, they lightly touch on the academic side, but it's really not the main purpose of that personal statement. So we'll show that in a couple slides. Um, how do you handle a why university essay for our safety schools? Do we lie? So, a couple things. Thank you so much for this question, Adriana. First of all, I do not personally like the term safety school. Um, Really, what we've seen in our experience in Blue Ivy is that really there's no such thing as a safety school anymore. The competition has gotten so fierce when you're applying for college. We like to talk about a match school and we like to talk about a likely school. So schools where it might be likely where you're accepted. And this is what I would also say. For your likely and match schools, it needs to be a school you're actually interested in. And sure, most students are and families are most interested in the most difficult universities to get into, the most prestigious universities, the ones that have the highest perceived ranking. But for all the universities on your list, you really need to make sure that it's a school that you actually like. And, for the Why University essay, it requires a lot of research. So, I will dive deep with students going on a university's webpage. I'll ask the student, if they might have a friend who goes to that university to ask them about it. I'll ask the student to maybe go online and find more information about the university, regardless if it's your number one choice where you're applying early decision, or regardless if it's your, not the school you would least want to go to. You need to find an authentic connection about what that school has to offer you and what you have to offer that school. So, yes, it might be harder to answer that why if you're not as interested, but it's still really important to have a very clear connection. Thank you so much for that question, Adriana. Other common forgive me. Other common supplemental essay questions. What is your community? How do you define your community? How are you going to bring that sense of community to our campus? So those are some other pretty common ones. One that a lot of the most prestigious schools are asking now is how do you deal with differing opinions? This is a question that Yale is asking. This is a question that Columbia is asking, at least in the previous cycle. A lot of universities have seen a lot of complex discourse on campus and a lot of people with very different opinions who are not necessarily listening to the other side. So this is a very, very interesting supplemental essay that can give us a lot of perspective on how a student would be dealing with other types of opinions. And then finally, you typically can have an activity essay. So like, tell us about an activity and why it's meaningful for you. Most universities are not going to have all five of these. Some of them might, but most universities might have one of these or might have two of these. This is something that you need to check, or if you're working with us at Blue Ivy, we help guide you and make sure that you know what essays you're going to be looking at. So this is why on the previous slide I said your personal statement does not necessarily need to be academic. Your personal statement should be a story, specific in scope, where you can talk about yourself. And then all these other elements you can talk about in your additional essays. Now, I just said, and with creative writing, there's so many different ways that you could tackle this. So I'm going to give a suggested structure. This is by no means a rule. This is by no means the only way to tackle an essay. Some students, when they write an essay, they like to start in media res, which means like in the middle of the action. And then, for example, maybe they start right in the middle of the action, the most intense scene, and then they take you backwards in time and show you how they got there. That's one great way of doing it. That's not the only way of doing it. Some students like to start off with some dialogue and get people really excited. There are a lot of different ways to do it. This is one suggested structure. So, we like to think that if you're following the structure, you should divide your essay into these thirds. First, whenever you're talking about whatever story you're telling, what were the challenges that you dealt with and the effects of those challenges? The second third is what did you do about those challenges? And then the final third is what did you learn? Typically, typically, if a student is writing this by themselves, usually they just focus on the first part. What were my challenges and what were the effects? And then they leave the last paragraph to maybe talk about what they did about it and what they learned about it. It's really important, especially this part, what did you learn about it? Those sort of reflections that sort of make your connection, show what connections you're making. That needs to be a very big part of your essay. The like, what reflections I have and what did I learn should not just be a tiny part you tack on the end. It should really be a substantial part of the essay. And I put this last part, this is not necessarily a rule. This is just, good practice in my view. Typically, we like to end our essays sort of with a forward-facing perspective. So, like, with these lessons that I've learned, how will I use them going forward? Many students will directly say, now I will go to university and I'll be able to apply all of these skills. That's not the only way to do it. And your future is not just where am I going to go to college? So, I generally suggest that we follow this structure, but again, anything can work. But I like this structure just because, saying anything can work can be a little overwhelming for our students. So giving them this sort of structure can be helpful for our students. Something else that I like to talk about is sort of your application narrative. And your application narrative goes beyond just the personal statement. The personal statement is a key element of your application narrative, but it's just one part. So throughout your activities list, throughout your personal statement, throughout your supplemental essays, you need to think about what is the story that you're sharing with the university. In this question, as Gloriana mentioned towards the beginning in her comment, what are your values? In this next point, I find really important. There needs to be a connection between the story that you're telling throughout your common application and what you're saying in your personal statement. So, for example, if you're saying in a supplemental essay, or if you're saying in your personal statement that you love helping people, that helping people is what makes you feel so passionate, yet you have zero activities related to volunteering, tutoring, or any type of help. It's like, do you really care about helping people? So, I hope that doesn't come across as harsh, but I want us all to think about this, that we talk about for our applications that they're holistic. When we talk about holistic, we mean they're looking at all the different elements. So, again, you need to make sure that there's a tangible connection between what you're expressing in all the different parts of your application and between your essays. I see that we might have a comment here. It's got to be an authentic essay. Absolutely. Authenticity is number one. So, before we jump into some real examples, this is something again, in the same way I said that the structure can be so diverse, lots of creativity there. The topics that you cover can literally be anything. And there's no quote unquote forbidden topic. Like nothing is forbidden. However, here I have a list of topics that I would never say, carte blanche, never use these topics, right? This is not what I'm saying. These are some topics that are used a lot. These are some topics that some admissions counselors might say are overdone. So again, I'm going to read through this list and we're going to talk about this list. If you have a great idea and if you have a fascinating way of tackling this topic, my God, please go ahead and write about that topic. But many of our students, I think about when I was in high school versus the high schoolers now, they have a lot more vocabulary related to mental health. It is a much more talked about topic, which I think is a wonderful thing for these generations that are growing up. However, many students jump towards writing about their mental health. So unless if you have a really unique spin on it, and especially you're going to need to have a really positive twist on the end on like how you grew through your mental health. Typically, we want to see, regardless of whether it's mental health or a different topic, we typically want to see a positive spin at the end of our essays. So if you want to write about mental health, please go ahead, as long as you have an interesting way of taking it on. And forgive me for this next one. Again, I hope this does not sound too harsh. Many students, when they think about challenges, they jump to the passing of a loved one, which makes sense, especially for the age that they're at. Especially considering when people think of challenges, that's a huge challenge that many teenagers face. And of course, it's a heartbreaking challenge. It's also a really common topic. A lot of people talk about that. So if you're going to talk about the passing of a loved one as the main, and I'll let you know, I had a student and he did actually write about the passing of a loved one, and that ended up being his essay. And he did a good job, but he had to get really personal. I also told him, you have to feel comfortable with me, critiquing this essay. You have to feel comfortable with me saying, no, dig deeper. You're not digging deep enough. And that can be very hard, especially with this topic. So again, if you have an interesting way of doing it, if you have a really interesting perspective, go for it. COVID. So, again, I feel for this generation. I was a classroom teacher when the pandemic happened, and I saw how hard it was for my students to connect online. I saw how hard it was for them to replicate their educational experiences in this online classroom. The thing is, pretty much everyone in the world went through this. So, if again, this one especially, I really would gear most students towards not talking about COVID unless there's a really interesting way of doing it. This next one, overly controversial without a point. You know, I am not necessarily recommending that students jump at going at a super controversial issue and like diving headfirst. If they're going to write about an issue that is interpreted as being divisive or controversial, there has to be very delicate. It has to be something that, you feel comfortable talking about, and you really can balance it very much. Universities do not want to hear, I know what I'm talking about. I'm right. Everyone else is wrong about this issue. No university wants to hear that. Universities want to hear somebody who comes in, shares their perspective, and also talks about what others might think. And again, with this controversial topic point, many of our prestigious universities will already be asking students to write supplemental essays saying, how do you deal with differing opinions? So yeah, unless if there's a really good reason for it, and as long as you're treating it incredibly delicately, a super controversial topic, I would invite you to reconsider, unless if you have your own specific way of doing it and you can balance all the controversy. And this one might sound silly, but sports injuries. It's so common. It's a very common topic. And you don't want to just pick something that everyone else is doing. But yeah, that's sort of my recommendation there. We are going to jump into some real essays here. I'll make this a little bit bigger for you all. I'm going to read this aloud, and I'm going to again ask. So please, everybody, I'm not going to necessarily call on your name and be like, hey, you, answer me. But I'm going to ask at the end, after I'm done reading this, what did you notice about the student's tone? What did you notice about the student's voice? When we talk about voice, sort of their personality. How does their personality shine through? And again, I would want you to consider the part here of what is the connection between the academic topic of interest. This essay is not, this is why I want to study computer science. This is not an essay that's telling you, this is why I want to study computer science. It's telling a specific story and scope and lightly touches on the student's academic interest. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then at the end, I'll ask you all for your comments. Every time I entered Text Printing Hub, I found the same unchanging, almost immutable scene. High schoolers rushing into the room with the unrealistic hope that the printing process would be efficient. Architecture students standing in lines for up to 20 minutes to print their blueprints. Teachers complaining about their lost exam copies. The best way to waste your time at tech was to print something. Also, forgive me that you can all read what I'm reading out, right? You can see the page that I'm reading out, just to double check there. Okay, let me see here. Yes, thank you. Text motto, excuse me. Text motto, entrepreneurial spirit, resonated in my head. I had to solve tech's inefficient printing process using technology. I designed the project's logo in Adobe Illustrator, took out my Raspberry Pi, and drew some initial thoughts on paper. Amidst 30 tabs open on my web browser and crumpled up pieces of paper, Project Kiwi, a fruitization of my last name Skews, was finally born. But to succeed, I would need more than one head. Soon, Lulu, Garfias, Lalo, Rafa, and I, all members of Tech's Computer Science Club, started meeting on Wednesdays and Thursdays at our high school's commons to deliver to the school community. We learned everything from universal printing protocols like IPP to features from Google Firebase we didn't know existed. We fixed every single bug, from documents not loading correctly to the ZBar library not working properly. After 3 months of after-school work, our 4-inch device could turn any normal printer into a smart printer. Step 1. Students and teachers would upload their documents to our website, auto-generating a QR code. 2. Scanning or manually entering the code into our device prints the document. Voila! I arranged a meeting with the tech's head of the IT department to pitch our product in January. Unfortunately, I would be in England by then. January 17th. I was waiting for the news to come from the other side of the Atlantic. 2 hours of impatient wait. Then I received one single WhatsApp message. Project Kiwi would not be implemented. Julio Cortázar, one of my favorite Latin American writers, once made the distinction between a novel and a short story. The novel wins by points, the short story by knockout. My friend's irritating lack of details left room for imagination. Is Kiwi a novel still waiting for a new chapter to be written? Or is this the tragic and unexpected ending to the Kiwi tale? I received a flurry of messages. Tech had already signed a contract with the current company, Global Print, to install a similar system. Ellipses again. Anger, guilt, and indecision coexisted in me like a quantum superposition of feelings. Project Kiwi, which hiddenly bore my last name, was now synonymous with failure. Was it inevitable? Would things be different if I had been there? No. My scientific mind had learned a lesson. Solving the technical aspect does not guarantee success. Real life is multifactorial. Still, so much time spent for nothing. Ambivalence dominated me. I had to distract myself. Eating ramen and singing along to Les Mis with the other Mexicans in my program did the trick. Relaxed at last, I could reflect on what had happened. The Laplace-Runge lens vector, the Newton-Raphson method, or the Wagner-Fisher algorithm are just some examples of how, in STEM, multiple people arrive independently at the same result. My journey with Kiwi was a lifelong warning. Never assume you are the only one trying to solve a problem. Today it was a printing company that won the race. Tomorrow, when I become a scientist, another research group might win the race. Finally, I learned that success can hide behind the failure mask. Kiwi is not connected to a printer anymore. Instead, it is a trophy that lies next to my diplomas, Best Delegate Awards, and Science Olympiad medals. It stands as a reminder of how much we could achieve. We built a semi-automatic printing system as high schoolers. This was no failure after all. The moments spent together and the vast knowledge acquired were some of our greatest triumphs. I would love, thank you all, and huge kudos to the student and huge kudos to their coach, the coach guiding this process. But the important thing here is that this came from the student. This was the student's perspective. So, as I asked before I started reading, could everybody please just start putting in the chat box, what did you notice about how the student's voice? What did you notice about how the student approached writing the essay? What do you notice about the topic? What do you notice about the connection between their academic interest and how they focus the academic interest here? Again, this is not an essay saying, this is why I want to study computer engineering or computer science. No, it tells a specific story. So I would love if everybody could put some comments here in the chat box. What did you notice about this essay in all these different domains? It took us through a story. It apparently spoke about tech, but in reality, it's the student explaining how they deal with failure. Exactly. It's about failure, right? That's really the important part of the story. And I think the thing that I really appreciate, and we're going to see this in the other example we'll see in a moment, there's a little bit of humility here. right? Admitting that the student is not perfect, admitting that this process is messy. This is what I always say to students. If you can get into the messy realities of your life, and if you trust the audience with that, that shows how vulnerable you can be. So this student admitting that, they weren't successful, but it didn't matter. They still learned a lesson. Gabriel, thank you so much for your comment. They exactly they did the one third, one third, one third. What was the challenge? What did they do? And what did they learn? Exactly. And again, that's not necessarily a requirement, Gabriel, that it be one third, one third, one third. But certainly, I like to tell students that the what they learned should not just be tacked on at the end. Really descriptive and also humorous. Yes. So thank you, Tarek. We can see here, especially this beginning. This is sarcastic. Now, what I always talk about with coaches and students is we don't want to be so sarcastic that we seem arrogant, but some light sarcasm, this idea, the best way to waste your time at tech was to print something. He's not, destroying his school. He's not, saying how horrible his school is. He's being humorous about a reality of his school. Zengi, I really love the gradual buildup. It also kept me interested in the story, so I would assume that if I wanted to read this, they would probably feel the same way, and especially when it was resolved, right? It came to the resolution. Luis, it's a combination of hope and real life. Love that, right? And, especially this end, I talked about this, that sort of the forward-facing part. They talk about tomorrow when I become a scientist, another research group might win the race. For a 17, 18-year-old, that's a pretty profound, I don't know if I had that reflection when I was that age, but that idea to be able to have that reflection just really shows a lot of thought from the students. So yeah, thank you all so much. I'm going to quickly go through this other example, and I just really appreciate this example because it shows humility and it shows embarrassing moments. So again, I'm going to ask quickly if you have any questions or any observations. It was like a stereotypical nightmare. During an icebreaker in my very first class as an international student at the Hill School, the teacher asked us where we wanted to go on a trip. I said I wanted to go to Australia because the beaches looked nice. There was immediate silence. Time stopped and the awkwardness was ridiculously present. It might have been 15 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. The teacher stared at me in the eyes, the look of shock on his face. I was confused, wondering what was happening. Then everyone burst out laughing, and I realized that because of my strong Mexican accent, they had misunderstood what I was trying to say. Lots of humility there. Moving from a small community in Mexico City to a prestigious boarding school in Pennsylvania, I was expecting a cultural shock, but I wasn't prepared for how it would actually feel. I imagined the hardest part to adapt to would be the academics. I was surprised how hard it was to play soccer in another language. I didn't realize that I would constantly be put on the spot. Every word that came out of my mouth analyzed and dissected. I quickly learned how to laugh at these embarrassing moments and not to take them personally. My Mexican peers typically live at home until they get married. People told me I was crazy for wanting to study in the United States when I was just 15. Yet, since middle school, I knew that I wanted to attend college in the US. Even as a young child, though, I didn't totally understand the reality. I knew that this represented opportunity, ambition, and success. My family was unfamiliar with the process, so I took it upon myself to begin researching. While my family supported my efforts, they left it up to me to bring it to fruition. I needed to improve my English, and I applied to the Americans High School in Mexico City. Unfortunately, I was rejected. While my math skills were advanced, my English was too low. My disappointment fueled motivation, and I started studying English on my own and with a tutor. I also watched The Office at least 8 times. One of my goals at the Hill was to try everything that wasn't available to me in Mexico. For PE, I chose crew, and for STEM elective, I chose intro to web development. I discovered that in computer science, my Mexican accent didn't matter. My code spoke for itself. The class was filled with other international students, but pretty soon we were all speaking the same language. It didn't matter if your native tongue was Spanish or Chinese. We all worked in Java. Computer science gave me a platform to connect to my classmates and allow my true personality to come out. It sparked my creativity in solving problems and met my need to understand how things work. Being forced out of my comfort zone at Hill initially felt like the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was a mix between awkward and scary. I sometimes doubted whether it was worth it. I now realize that it had given me the confidence and skills to seek out opportunities. Today, I'm the intern in the lab who gets out of his chair, taps random researchers on the shoulder, and introduces himself. I no longer worry about my English or my accent. In fact, it is often an icebreaker that leads to interesting conversations about our experiences and backgrounds. Despite coming from different countries and even continents, we always discover shared passions. We usually end up talking about Messi joining a US soccer team. Our interactions naturally end up with them explaining their research, and I usually take advantage of the moment to find out more. You never know what you're going to learn and the doors it might open. So again, as with the previous one, what did you notice about this essay? What are your thoughts? What did it include? Sort of what was the student's approach? Tell me about the tone. I'll give everybody a moment to write out their thoughts. What did we notice? What did we see about how the student approached how they wrote this essay? Okay, so in your perception, thank you for sharing. You felt like it wasn't as interested in the first one. It was a little cliche. Yeah, okay. I probably would view the first one as being a little bit stronger. Um, I don't view it as being as cliched, but that's a valid perspective. And this idea of subjectivity is something that I find important. Anyone else want to put a comment into the chat box? What did you notice about how the student approached this one? I would probably agree maybe that the ending was not as profound as maybe the other one. But I still think that there was something the student gave. Maybe it wasn't as different, like the idea we all work in different, we all come from different backgrounds, right? I like this one. I felt like he did a great job using his real experience. Yeah. So I think, for me, the fact that he started out the essay talking at a time that he was really embarrassed, that makes him human. That's something that I really appreciated. And actually, I did like the idea of him talking about how the code spoke for himself. And this goes back to my point that, this is why I want to study computer science. He still has space in his Why Computer Science supplemental essay to write more like, about the experience of working with the code. Here he's talking at it more as a human being. Here he's talking at it more in how he found himself. How he solved it and now uses it in his favor going forward. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Glow. So yeah, these are two different essays. And again, as I've said, it can be a little subjective, which one we might like more, and that's a very valid conversation. But at least we can see there are different ways of approaching it. Another thing I would love to mention really quickly is that there's a little more looseness with grammar and with, sentences. Especially the first one, they put like step one and step two, and a lot of essays you wouldn't necessarily write like that. Both of them would use parentheses and write full sentences. And even the first one, a full sentence for him was 2 hours of impatient wait. Typically, in a formal essay, that would not be a complete sentence. Whereas here, lightly breaking grammatical rules is acceptable for a US context. Having said that, let's talk about the UK process. The UK is very, very different. So just so you know, before we jump into, what the essay looks like, the UK is really rigorous in how it determines if you qualify for a program. In the US, it's usually like you need to take 4 years of science, 4 years of math, 4 years of English, 4 years of a foreign language, something like that, and it's a little more loose. In the UK, if you're not from the UK and you're applying to the UK with a high school diploma from a different country, you need to be very rigorous in checking the requirements. Usually the best way of getting accepted directly into a UK program is going to be through taking the IB. But there are programs where it says you need to take this specific IB math. You need to take this specific IB computer science and get this specific score. So just so you know, we're not going to go deep into this, but I just want you to know that if you're considering a school in the UK, really important to do your research about what requirements they're looking for. This is something that we go very in depth with our students. We're happy in, future webinars, or if you want to reach out to us and ask questions about this, we're happy to show you how to look at all these requirements. Where in the US, you apply via the Common App. Here in the UK, you apply via UCAS, which stands for Universities and Colleges Admission Services. In the US, you can apply up to 20 universities. In the UK, you can only apply to 5 universities, which for some people sounds shocking. I put a little asterisk here. There's some exceptions. Later after most people have already applied, there's a potential that there are programs that are still left open and you can potentially apply to more. But for all intents and purposes, in the first round of applications, in the main round of applications, you're really only applying to 5. And this is so important because you have to have a balanced list, So if you're going to be applying to Cambridge or Oxford, it's going to be really important to make sure that you actually have the requirements to apply there because you only have 5 spots. In the US, you can make this decision or not, but in the US, if you want to apply to Harvard or Yale or Berkeley, just to see what happens, okay, that's 1 spot. But in the UK, if you're taking 1 spot out of 5, that's a lot more of a commitment and that's a lot more of a risk. So it's an interesting sort of philosophical difference on what college applications look like. Now, I'm going to show you these prompts. Um, in so unlike the US version where you choose one prompt, here you have to answer all 3. Why do you want to study this course or subject? How have your qualifications and studies helped you to prepare for this course or subject? What else have you done to prepare outside of education? And why are these experiences useful? So, very, very different. The US one is like, tell me about a time where you grew. Tell me about a time you were grateful. It's like you as a human being. Here, it's you as a student. Here, and you have to answer all 3 of these questions. Why do you want to study this? How are your qualification studies preparing you for this course or subject? And what else have you done? Something else that's really interesting, your personal statement for the United States does not depend on which US universities you're applying to, right? If you're applying to Harvard or if you're applying to Boston University or you're applying to Purdue, you're not tailoring your personal statement for each one of those universities, right? You're not talking about those universities in your US personal statement. Whereas for the UK, it is incredibly important to have already defined what the 5 universities are and what specific program you're looking for. Something else that's interesting is that in the US, there's a lot of flexibility with applying. You can apply psychology here and you can apply business management here, no problem. Here, since you only have one essay, that's your Y major and Y university essay, you really need to have all of the majors you're applying for make sense with the essay that you're writing. So, it's if you're maybe you might apply to business management in one program and economics in one program, that's fine. They're, semi-related and you can make a lot of connections for why those are ones you're interested in. But I just wanted to mention that sort of difference. So here for the UK personal statement, we have these 3 different questions. You have a total of 4,000 characters, not words, characters that you have to write this to answer between all 3 different questions. Here, it has to be academic. Here, you have to give an academic perspective. And also, it's important to keep in mind there's no supplemental essays. In the US, you'll have a bunch of other essays that will help complement your vision, help complement your narrative. In the UK, you don't have that. You just have these 3 questions, and this is all you can write about to share with them. And another thing I wanted to point out is that this is a new format. They're now asking you to answer these 3 questions separately. So originally, and the example that I'm going to show you in a moment is via the old format. Basically the same questions. They sort of had 8 different questions that sort of touched on the same topics, and we're like, answer this in 4,000 characters. Now they're going to be separating them out for this upcoming cycle. So keep that in mind when I show you the real example. The real example was written under the previous format. So let me show you really quickly one of our UK examples. And I would love to also hear your reflections on what you notice about this. From a young age, I've always been captivated by the complex interplay of decisions shaping nations globally. My fascination with the butterfly effect of small conflicts fuels a deep passion for understanding our interconnected world. Contrary to the notion that politics exists in a separate realm, I believe that its influence permeates every facet of our daily lives. My curiosity about diverse cultures evolved into a profound appreciation for politics, driven by a persistent quest for a comprehensive global perspective. In pursuing a bachelor's in liberal arts and sciences with a focus on global policies at Erasmus University College, my unwavering dedication is to unravel the intricacies of our world and comprehend how political dynamics impact lives globally. My educational journey has been significantly deepened by my understanding of international relations. Enrolling in the IB Global Politics high level exposed me to a myriad of theories illuminating the way nations interact. This course equipped me with invaluable tools and perspectives essential for navigating the complex world of political science when addressing contemporary issues and their solution. For example, the theory of realism helped me shed light on the universal pursuit of power and control as a means to ensure protection, security, and at times, prestige and interest on the international stage. This theoretical foundation has proved instrumental in deciphering the underlying reasons behind political conflicts, like when I analyzed in one of my internal assessments from the Somali Civil War the dangers that extremist groups pose to the local population and legitimacy of the government. Being able to analyze an issue from various different lenses and perspectives can greatly extend one's view of how interactions between actors are made and the consequences that those may have on the political dynamics of a state or the world. I've also explored global issues through my 7 year involvement in Model UN, acting as a delegate, a head chair, and more recently as the Secretary General of my school's clubs. These roles equip me with the skills to strategically advocate diverse perspectives, even conflicting with my own beliefs at times, and navigate effective problem solving and negotiation. Analyzing state positions and interests became second nature, providing a comprehensive introduction to the dynamics of my envisioned future career in international relations. Model UN has been engaging, fascinating, and a catalyst for my academic and professional growth, solidifying my commitment to the field. Outside of my interest in global affairs, I've always been reading about my country's politics and involving myself in local movements and protests I have seen as important for the current state of Mexico and its future. I have never felt so live involved in the history of my nation than when I found myself marching with over 500,000 people gathered at the main square, chanting in support of democratic values and a free Mexico. This participation not only shaped my identity as a Mexican, but also influenced my interests in politics. I saw that the people do have a voice and the power to make change in favor of those interests, even with the odds against them. My preparedness for success in international relations comes from a deep passion and commitment to my current studies and future pursuits in the field. With a resolute focus on channeling all my effort and enthusiasm into this area, I am confident that my unwavering dedication will lay the groundwork for success in my prospective career in the international sphere. So, anybody have any, what do you notice? Any comments on what you saw in that essay? Maybe compared to the US style, seeing this UK style. What did you notice about how that student approached the topic? Was the student's tone sarcastic, like in the other examples? Was the student talking about the time they mispronounced a word in a class? What was the difference, or what did you notice about these essays? This essay, forgive me. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that it's a much more formal tone. You're not seeing sarcasm. You're not seeing, sentences that are not complete sentences. You're not seeing sentences within parentheses. It's a much more formal tone. And everything in that essay was connected to the course of study that they wanted to do. So, unlike the US ones, where maybe they lightly touched upon their academic interests, or maybe don't even talk about their academic interests at all, in the UK, everything is about How is this going to prepare you for the program? How are those skills connected to the program? So, I have a student where she might write her US personal statement. Oh, I see someone has he shared his views about politics and why he wants to study this major. Exactly. I also think the student did a good job of not getting too controversial. Like the student didn't start naming politicians they weren't in favor of. They didn't get too controversial into it. They mostly just focused on we want a free Mexico, we want a free society, a free democratic society. So, they directly confronted the issue, but they didn't get all controversial about it. Very good. So I think those are really some important points to keep in mind. So I have a student who's applying to the US and she might be writing about figure skating. And figure skating, she's not planning on talking about her academic topic of interest. Very valid for a US personal statement, not valid for a UK personal statement. Because, unless if you can directly connect it to the major, it's not going to work. Probably one of the most common questions that I'm getting right now is, what about AI? Right? Many students will tell me, oh, AI is so great. AI is how I, figure out how to write my essays. That's all great. I want to show you. So, this is from Caltech, California Institute of Technology. This is sort of their guideline for people applying. So they talk about they want to hear your voice. If you try to use an AI, it will dilute your unique expression and perspective. You know, each one of us expresses ourselves in a very specific way. And, if you have a friend that's reading the essay and they feel like, hey, this doesn't sound like you, that might be a big indicator that you're not actually writing using your own voice. And an AI is not going to have your voice. So I really, really recommend this to students that they are not using AI to be producing content. Here, Caltech explicitly says these are the things that are unethical. Copying and pasting directly from an AI generator, 100%. Relying on AI generated content to outline or draft an essay. That's definitely an interesting point there, and I'll get back to this point in a second. Replacing your unique voice and tone with an AI generated essay. Translating an essay written in another language. So, very explicitly, Caltech, one of the most prestigious institutions we have in the United States, is saying this is what you should not be doing. Here they say that it's okay if you want to use an AI tool like Grammarly or Microsoft Editor to review grammar or spelling. So they say that that's okay. Generating questions or exercises to kickstart the brainstorming process. So like actually I think this could be an interesting way of using AI. You know, all of us here, maybe, I'm still figuring out what the use of AI is in education. I think this will be for the next generation, the challenge within education. What is the balance? It's the tool of today, but it's also, are we holding back our students by not letting them use AI? But we can see very clearly from the universities, do not just put an outline into an AI and expect it to write your essay for you. That's not going to be you. It's not going to be unique. And it does say using it to like double check grammar is okay. Interestingly, in the UK, so this is directly from UCAS. So, interestingly, it also brings up the idea of brainstorming, saying that brainstorming is a great idea. That's something we see both from Caltech. We're not going to have a time to look at it, but you know, we have some other ones that sort of say some similar things. Interestingly enough, whereas the Caltech one is telling you not to use it to structure your essay, here very explicitly, UCAS says it's okay to use an AI to structure your personal statement. I would tend to recommend to not use it to structure the personal statement. I would tend to recommend that you try to write it yourself and then take it from there. And here, oops, sorry. Here it says the same thing that you can use it to double check grammar, right? You can use it to check if it's readable. So, checking like, hey, are there any grammatical errors here? Hey, are there any problems here? That seems to be acceptable for a lot of universities, but generating and copying pasting, definitely not. Whether or not to use it to help with structure, the UCAS one is saying that you can potentially use it to help with structure. The US universities are very explicitly telling you not to use it to help with structure. There's all this controversy. people are, universities are now using AI detection software. How good is that detection software? There's a huge amount of debate online in the media. Journalists debate this all the time. How effective are they? This is what I tell students, whether we're talking about an application essay or whether we're talking about a work in college, you need to be prepared to defend your work and defend that you did your work for the rest of time. Now, students, college, if, a college, I'm speaking more specifically in the college classroom, but if a professor's asking you, how did you develop this argument? And you do not have a good explanation of what your thought process is, you're going to be in trouble. So, AI, use it cautiously, maybe use it to check grammar, maybe use it to check spelling, but beyond that, I would not recommend using it. And again, I'm showing you directly from the universities what to consider there. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate, today we covered a lot and I really appreciated, the participation of those of you who were, sharing in the chat box. Um, if anybody has any further questions about the U.S. personal statement, um, on the UK personal statement, we're happy to answer them. Will there be a session focus in Canadian universities? Yeah, Canadian universities. So it's not as standardized as the US universities. So really it's, university by university what they're asking for. Typically in a Canadian application, the sort of personal statements or writing are very, very specific. I had a student where he was applying, I think it was British Columbia, and it was like, tell us about an issue in the world that you're facing that, tell us about an issue that is important to you in the world and what your perspective is on it. And that student, going into this topic of controversial topics, the student first chose a topic related to a current conflict in the world. And then I kept telling the student, okay, but I don't actually see what your opinion is here. And the student was like, but I feel like it's too controversial. If I share my opinion about what I think about this global conflict, someone might get mad. And I told them, if you do not feel comfortable sharing your opinion, and if you can't express that opinion in the space, let's choose a different topic. And he talked about, instead of talking about that global conflict, he ended up talking about water access in his country. Great topic as well. Very important topic. But yeah, so in the question, Luis, about Canadian universities, it's usually university by university. It's not as standardized as we've seen in the UK and we've seen in the US. So it's really looking at what is this university asking for? And it's following the same sort of logic, right? How you're expressing yourself, probably typically more on the more formal side versus more on the US, like flowery, like telling you about what's going on in your heart, that type of thing. Okay? Thank you for that question, Luis. Anyone else? Any other questions that if you want to write them out, that's great. If anybody wants to open up their microphone and ask me a question, please go ahead. Anyone else? Again, please feel free to open up your mics. Please feel free to post it in the chat box, whatever is best for you. Anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I know that your time is valuable, so we'll end now a minute late. Apologize for that. But yeah, thank you all so much for your time. We hope you have a lovely day. Aranza, anything you want to add or?
No, Andrew, that's perfect. Just if Dana can put in the box the number or the link where they can. Oh yeah, she already did it. So if anyone have another question, you can schedule a meeting in the link, and we'll be very excited to help you.
Thank you so much, Aranza. Thank you so much, Dana. Thank you so much, Glo. Really appreciated everybody's participation tonight. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was a really interesting webinar.
Thank you so much, Aranza. Thank you, Denise. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. Okay. Thank you, everyone.